Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our honey harvest Q&A. If you're joining us from the Hive Mind, this is our third live Q&A, so we're super excited to have you joining us. We're here with Jason Graham, who is our amazing host, who is going to do a short presentation before we dive right into your questions. But feel free to load your questions into the comments. We'll be monitoring the comments over the course of the whole live, and we'll have plenty of time to answer all of those after this. And there's no beginner question, no question that's too advanced. Please throw all of those in there. Guarantee that somebody else has the same question as you do. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Jason, who will introduce himself and launch right into his presentation, and we will get started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Jason Graham, Dr. J. I went to school for bees. You can see you go to the next slide. I got a quick bio here to share. So I went to University of Delaware, where I learned beekeeping, and I continued that at University of Florida in Jamie Ellis's lab for my master's and PhD. I have experience working with bumblebees, small hive beetles, solitary bees and wasps, and worked with the endangered Hawaiian yellow-faced bee. I worked with Planet Bee Foundation, where we had hives at Google, Stanford, Genentech, and the proceeds from that helped schools to have pollinator programs. And now I'm working with Primal Bee since October 2024. Here's my email address on the screen. So jason@primalbee.com if you need to reach me. Okay, next slide. So when we're getting into honey harvest time, we should definitely do a good hive check and answer some of these questions. So do the bees have enough honey to spare? If I'm going to take too much honey, I need to leave them some for winter maybe. How many surplus fully capped honey frames do we have? And we follow the 80-20 rule. And I'm going to get into each of these a little bit more. Timing, do you want to harvest all your honey at once? Do you want to do this seasonally? Or do you just want to harvest frames as needed? So these are all great strategies. You know, sometimes it's easy to do it all at one time. Sometimes you want to separate your spring and fall flows. And sometimes it's easier just as you go to pull out frames as they get honey bound and add new frames in if you have a good storage system. So you also want to check for brood on these frames. Make sure that in your supers you don't have any brood. See what the food stores are down below in the nest box and how queen rate the colony is, how the colony overall health is, and if you've done any treatments, make sure that you've removed the honey supers if necessary for your particular mite treatments. So you should, I guess, have an idea about when, you know, if you're planning to add a treatment after the harvest as well. Okay, next slide. So this is a quick chart just showing some climate zones and how much honey you should, leave. And this is based on Langstroth boxes. In the Primal Bee hive, they would burn through or need less honey to get through the winter because they're not trying to heat their hive, so they don't need to use as much energy to go to that honey. But you should still try to leave them a good amount of honey, to make sure that they're not going to starve during the winter, or you may have to supplement with feeding. So in the higher altitudes, they're talking about having 2 deep boxes of honey or 3 mediums on your hive configuration. I would say with a Primal Bee hive, 1 to 2 deep boxes is good. Or 2 mediums. But if you feel you need to go a bit more, you may want to check it halfway through the winter, and see if you need to add another box back. And I'm going to talk a bit about storage and ways we can do that. So this is, I guess, in California where I'm at, I left 1 medium on, and they only used about 2 frames of that medium. So the rest of it, you got plenty of food from what was inside the nest box. Okay, next slide. So here's the same thing kind of in map form, so you can take a better look at this, and we can make these slides available as well for looking at later. But I hope this gives you an idea of what needs you have, for your particular hive. You might be able to cut this in half on a Primal Bee hive, but this is the recommendations for a Langstroth. Okay, next. So to decide what frames we're going to harvest, we want to take a visual inspection. So we're looking at the wax covering, and if at least 80% of the surface area has wax covering, then that honey is ready to harvest. If you have less than 80%, what can happen is a lot of that the moisture from the nectar is going to influence your moisture content of your honey, and it could spoil. So you want to make sure that you have, about 80 to 90% of the surface area covered. The bees know that the moisture content is perfect when they put the wax cappings on. Another way you can test this is to give the frame a quick shake. And if any nectar kind of flings out of the open cells, then the honey's not ready. So and then you can use the refractometer. So you're looking where the blue and white lines meet on the graphic there. And you want to see that your moisture reading is under 18% for honey. So this is kind of the best check you could do. And this would be the honey that you, after you spin it out, as this humidity will change, or the moisture content will change as you're processing your honey. Okay, next. So this is what we're going to need when we go out and get our frames. We want to have our hive tool, smoker, bee brush, a suit, all of our personal protection that we normally wear. And I also recommend these storage containers. They have a gasket that keeps the frames, they fit frames perfectly. Deeps were mediums. You can fit about 10 deeps in, maybe 11 or 12 if you stack on top, or depending on how thick your honey is. And so with the mediums, you could fit almost double that amount. But they come in various sizes, and it keeps the sunlight out because they're dark, but they do have a transparent lid, so you can kind of peek in and see how your honey is doing. Make sure that there's not wax moths or anything like that causing havoc in there. And I've kept frames in storage bins like these for sometimes 9 months, one time a full year, and the honey was fine when it did get harvested. It was, moisture content was great, tasted great, and no problems with it. But this will help keep ants out. I'd recommend storing it at about 70 degrees to 90 degrees, kind of, when I store it kind of in a garage or a pantry or something like that. But it's capped honey, so even if it gets too cold, it should be okay in here. All right, next slide. So to process, we're going to go and get our frames, inspect them for that 80%. Then we're going to shake or brush the bees off. Then I like to remove these frames from the area, and I'll show you what I mean by that. You want to get them away from the hive, basically, so that the bees aren't continuing to try to go to those honey frames. And then you want to place them in a sealed storage bin like the one I just showed. And then you want to replace those frames that you took out of that super with blank frames, so the bees can continue working and drawing out the comb on the blank frames. And you just kind of repeat this process, going back, pulling a frame, shaking or brushing it off into the hive, and then removing the frame from the area and placing in the storage bin until you have all the honey bound frames that you want, and you're not leaving any extra space behind in your hive. Okay, next slide. Optionally, you could use the skateboards. These fit inside of the feeder lid of the Primal Bee hive. And basically, you want to put the feeder lid under the super that you want to clear, and the bees can go through this to get down into the nest box, but can't get back up into the super. And so you leave it on the hive for a couple of days to see the bees move down out of that super, and it rarely gets all the bees. You're going to have to brush anyway, but this is an extra step. It's an extra time of going into your hive, but some folks, find that it's helpful. So you want to remove the empty honey supers, after you get the bees out, within a couple of days before any pests move in or the bees figure out some way to re-enter. Okay, next. So this is my method for shaking the bees off. Kind of just flick the wrist and I'm not banging it on the hive and squishing bees. I'm just kind of shaking it above the hive so the bees can fall in. Next. And then this is a great demonstration of how to brush the bees off. So you want to use, and if you could play that again once or twice, Magda. Thank you. So it's kind of flicking them into the hive, gentle, right? And just quick motions like that, and that'll clear those frames. And he's going top to bottom. So this kind of helps make it more efficient. So then I would grab, once that's dusted off on both sides, I'd put it into my storage bin right away. And I try to do, you could go to the next slide. Thanks. And so if my Primal Bee hives are here in the backyard, then I would go around the driveway here and have my storage bin on the opposite side. I've done, it really helps more hands, make the job lighter. So it helps to have one person, pulling frames, another person brushing them, another person, running them back and forth to the storage bin if you have a team to work with you. But it's also doable one person. Next frame. And when you get into the kitchen, you're going to want to make sure that everything is ready. So you can keep these frames in storage until you get everything ready. And this could be another project for a different weekend. Once they're in storage, like I said, they're fine for a long time. But when you do decide to get to the extraction process, you want to make sure all your surfaces are food safe. You want to use drop cloths where needed to kind of be able to quickly clean up. You have some towels and sinks ready in the same room. There's actually laws about if you're selling the honey, what your operation has to look like, whether it's in your house as there's the cottage law industry, or whether you have a kitchen that you're renting or building for honey extraction. You want to have clear space to be able to put the frames down, have your extractor in place, and you should have all the tools and stuff that you need, food safe containers, and always have a couple backup plans in case something doesn't work out halfway through the extraction. Okay, next. So I like to use those same storage bin lids as trays. So there's my tray, and I have capping, scratcher, and knife. I actually use both. I also have several different buckets. You want to have one with a honey gate at least. This is going to help you to let the honey settle and then filter out through the honey gate at the bottom. So you can see that yellow handle. It's our honey gate. There are various filter sieves to use to filter the honey, and then you're also going to want to have your bottles and storage containers for both the honey and the wax. Okay, next slide. So here's the process of how we extract. First, we uncap the honey on both sides. Then we place the frames in the extractor. We want to make sure our extractor is balanced. We have, the same amount of the frames on each. So if there's 3 spaces, you want 3 frames. If there's 4 spaces, 4 frames, 2. You want to make sure that it's balanced. If you have 2 or 3 on a 4-frame spinner, then it'll throw off your balance. So you should at least put an empty frame in there to hold the place. Okay, and then you want to spin the honey out of the frames. Then if you have a tangential extractor, then you're going to have to pull the frames up, flip them around, put them back in, and then respin. There's radial extractors that do this for you. What I do is I let that honey, then after I've spun it, some folks like to filter it right away out of the extractor, but I like to put it in a settling tank first and wait about 24 to 48 hours. So this could be a bucket. We want to keep it at about 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And let the wax float to the top. And then we can remove the wax layer, and it's going to slow that bottleneck of filtering right out of the extractor. You then can filter what's, after you pull the main chunk of the wax out, then you can filter the rest of the honey, bottle it up. Okay, next slide. So this is just showing a technique for using the knife. You're trying to keep as much of the cells as intact as possible when you're doing these cuts. so that the bees can easily fill it back up. Okay, next slide. And with the uncapping fork, kind of go in an upward motion, and I'm picking underneath of the wax cappings and pulling them up. And I've found that having both on hand helps, for different frames and different situations. Okay, next. And these are very helpful too. They're not required, but they're helpful to be able to put your uncapped frames in after they're spun, to let it drip off and collect the honey at the bottom. They're helpful for kind of having an extra bucket. Sometimes I'll, throw the wax cappings in here and just let them drain off. So these are available, or you can DIY something like this pretty easy. Next slide. Here's the tangential extractors. These are usually less expensive, but more work. You're going to have to pull out those frames, flip them, and put them in. So each frame kind of takes twice as long to harvest. Next slide. The radial extractors do this for you. There's also something called a reversible extractor, where it kind of switches between the tangential and radial by cranking backwards. These are a little more expensive. They go faster. They tend to be a bit more expensive. So, but they're great for commercial beekeepers and intermediate. You can also either get hand cranked or powered. And if you're extracting a lot of honey, I would recommend powered. If you just need a workout, then the hand crank is great. Okay, next slide.
Honey extractors range greatly in capacity. Small tangential models hold just 2 to 4 frames. Commercial radial extractors fit over 60 frames. Industrial lines process hundreds per cycle.
Okay, next slide. So you can scale depending on what you need. I just have a 4-frame extractor for backyard beekeeping, and it's worked fine for me for years. But next you want to look at filtering. So you want to extract, right? We're going to put that all into a settling tank and let the wax rise. This is going to save us a lot of time in filtering. The next thing we're going to do is use these 600 micron sieves, which take out the large wax chunks. And we can have this honey flow through this system 2 or 3 times. The next thing we want to do is add a fine polish. So we're going to add this 200 to 400 micron mesh. And this is going to make a nice clear honey. And then let it settle again after you bottle it so the air bubbles can, kind of settle out of that. Okay, next slide. So we want to bottle it up. You want to use very sterile, completely dry jars. If you get bacteria or something in, the lid of these jars, then it could cause problems later on. So, use food safety. You want to always leave a little bit of space at the top, and you want to seal it tight to keep the ants out, to close it and preserve that aroma and freshness. And then you want to store it in dry, dark, warm areas. If your house gets cold, here in California, sometimes we'll leave the windows open overnight. It drops below 60, and that can crystallize your honey very quickly. But you can add it to a warm water bath to get it liquid again pretty easily. Next slide. And if you're using different kinds of containers, I would always go glass over plastic for that very reason. So if I have a jar of crystallized honey, and it's in a safe glass jar, then I can put it into a warm water bath without having to worry about the plastic melting. You can get it up to about 110 degrees at the max is what you want to melt your honey to. If you that's kind of your best method of reheating, I think, and the glass kind of adds more quality, I feel like, more freshness than the plastic bottles. So keep it dark also. You want to keep your honey in the dark, as UV can actually change the flavor through the glass and break down the nutrients through glass or plastic. So it's best to keep your honey in a cupboard. Next slide. So the labels so there are federal law about what needs to be on the label if you're selling your honey. If you're just giving it to friends, you don't need to worry about this. But if you're, selling it, then you do need to have the product. Honey has to be displayed, very blatantly on the label. If it has any additives to it, if you've made an infusion with lavender, then you need to add lavender. You need to add the date and location of where the honey was harvested, the net weight, and the producer contact information. And then depending on your own state's laws, you may have extra requirements. Some states require you to grade your honey. And specifically, whether it's spring or fall honey. So look up your state requirements. Next. So you can test your honey by the refractometer. So you're looking for the moisture content. You could also get your honey tested at a lab for purity. And there are proton nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy that can be done that can tell your actual thumbprint of your particular honey. This is a great book for learning about how to measure your honey for aroma, clarity, flavor, and it talks about different honey varietals all around the world and how honey judges compare different honeys. Next slide. And that's kind of our warm up. So now the rest of the time is available for if y'all have any kind of questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. That was a great presentation as always. We did get one question during the live, so I will pull that up right now. So this came from, let me double check. It's Anne. Is it okay to freeze the honey until you are ready?
So it depends. If you're using it for human use, then it could change the flavor. If you're using it for the bees, then it's fine to freeze honey. In fact, it helps it to stop crystallizing. So, and kind of keeps it fresh. You can thaw it back out, no problem at room temperature. I would avoid using high heat more, is the, I guess, the biggest concern. So you don't want to have your honey at high heat, but you can freeze it. But it doesn't actually, since it has so little water content, it doesn't actually freeze like a block. It wouldn't be a frozen block of honey. It would be more like a gel consistency if you did put it in the freezer at home. Hope that helps.
And also, isn't, and maybe this is just a me question, but I read somewhere that honey doesn't expire, right? So you can kind of store it in an airtight container for a very long time. I mean,
yeah, pretty much
forever.
Indefinitely. Yeah. So they have honey that they've gotten from jars in Egyptian tombs that, was still totally fine to eat, food safe, and I'm sure as delicious as it was back then.
Right.
But yeah, so and that was now we have much more better technology in sealing the containers, and these gasket line storage tanks really are great because it really locks the humidity inside of the storage containers so that it's not affecting the honey. Some folks do dehydrate their honey a bit. So, if you bottle a sample and you're seeing that it's too high moisture content, maybe you didn't follow the 80-20 rule perfectly, or, something happened along the line. Maybe, some nectars have more moisture content in them than other nectars, depending on what flower they came from. So if you see that your moisture content is too high, you can dehydrate it. I've seen folks using incubators, kind of like eggs for that you would use similar for eggs, for chickens. I've seen folks use space heaters and just having a room that's kind of like a dry room where they're having the space heaters run with fans to kind of circulate the air. And that can help to reduce your moisture content. Here, I'm really having the biggest struggle with my honey crystallizing. So overnight, sometimes my honey will just crystallize, and if I want to use it again, then I bring it back up to about 100 degrees and it'll clear again. But I think it's best to kind of keep it at that 70, 80 degrees, so that it doesn't crystallize so quickly for you. But it's a good sign to see if your honey does crystallize. That means that it's pure honey. Sometimes, and it wasn't heat treated. Sometimes honey could be pasteurized and then it will not crystallize, or it could be added. It could have sugar water added to it or something like that would make it not crystallize. So
interesting.
Yeah, if you purchase honey and it crystallizes, that's actually a good sign.
Yeah. That was actually a question that someone asked about their honey crystallizes. Did they do something wrong? So I think that's a good one to have answered there too. This is another one that seems to come up a lot in forums, but people wonder if they have to wait until every cell is capped to harvest. What if a frame is only 70 to 80% capped?
Yeah, so I've seen folks do a couple of different things. If they're having a frame that's 70 to 80% capped, maybe 80 to 90 is what we're shooting for, but on the 70 to 80, we're getting close. Can we still harvest this honey? And it helps if you do kind of that snap test and shake out some of that nectar. Then you're going to have less influence of a high, moisture content nectar in your final, mix of honey. So it's okay. And like I said, we can dehydrate the honey, with those warm rooms and air fanning on it to get the moisture content down below the 18%. So yeah, still some things you could do, and so that's one good trick is to kind of shake out the nectar if you do have nectar.
Another good one here was, how do I prevent robbing while I'm moving frames and supers around?
Yeah, so this is really why I go, to a different location where I'm putting my honey away from where I'm pulling the frames. So I have, I have my apiary set up, and that's where I'm pulling the frames out and I'm brushing the bees. And then I walk through a gate, close the gate behind me. I walk around the side of the house, and then that's where I'm opening up my container, putting the bees into that container, and then putting the lid back down. And so I'm trying to make sure I don't get as any bees as I'm going. But sometimes I'll still have 3 or 4 bees kind of that got into that storage bin, and it's not a huge deal. You can kind of look in and pick them out later. Once you have the hive closed back up and you're ready to move on. I have actually seen some folks do a honey extraction kind of outside with an apiary nearby, and that's a really bad idea. It just starts to attract all the bees to your extractor, to all that messy stuff, the trays, and it feels like it's a good idea because you're outside, even if it's not near an apiary. Maybe you want to go to a park and do this so that you're not messing up your kitchen. But it's important to have running water, handy so that you can wash things up. And anytime you have this much honey, out, those odors will draw in all kinds of pest insects, including, while you're trying to do your extraction, I would say honeybees, are going to be coming and trying to help out with moving some of that honey. So,
yeah. This is an interesting one, but I think you kind of answered it already. But I'm curious just to hear your opinion on smokers during harvest. Do they make it worse? Would you use one?
Yeah, so this is a great, and there are smokers available now that are smokeless. So it's more of a vapor that you're vaporizing, kind of a essential oil that it has a different smell to it, and I'm not sure if it's going to change the flavor of honey. Kind of too early to tell. I have one that I've been testing. We do notice that your honey can taste a bit smoky if you used a lot of smoke while you were extracting it, or you generally use a lot of smoke while you're doing beekeeping. So, it's kind of good to use just as much smoke as you need down at the entrance, a puff or two here, but if you're, really heavily using the smoker, then it could definitely influence the taste of your honey. It's a great tool. Basically, the smoker is blocking or masking the smell of alarm pheromone. So when bees get worked up, they start to smell like bananas, like it smells like artificial banana candy. That's what it smells like to me, at least. And as I start to smell that, this is the bees signaling, okay, we're having a problem with their hive. We need everybody in defense mode. Get out there, start bouncing off this beekeeper's veil, see if you get in there and sting them. And so using the smoke kind of covers all that up so they don't smell the banana anymore. And it kind of stops this cascade, and sometimes I'll use smoke on my hands or on my gloves to kind of get the smell, of the stingers or the alarm pheromone off of them, kind of using a smoke wash. And different kinds of smoke may change your honey flavor in different ways. In Florida, I used pine needles. There was just pine straw everywhere. So we would use that. It's nice and dry and burns well, but you did kind of get a pine hint to some of the honey, if we had used the smoker a lot. Here I'm using incense more often and noting like a cinnamon-ish flavor to my honey. So,
Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess you can kind of play around with that. There's also smoker fuel. They're finding that stinging nettle, the plant, when dried, used in your smoker, can also combat varroa mites. And so, another thing to kind of bring up with the smokers, benefits to using different types of blends in your smoker.
Yeah, that's very cool. You covered this a little bit, but what do you do with wet frames after extraction? Do you put them back on the hive, or do you store them? And if you do store them, how would you go about doing that? Specifically, maybe talking about Primal Bee frames.
Okay. So with and maybe I should touch on this real quick too, is with the long nest frames, I never extract honey from those. That's really just for the bees.
Right.
I'll put those nest frames in, and my nursery doesn't need, I don't need to go in there. The only reason I'm looking at that honey really when I'm doing my honey harvest is to see how much honey they'll be left with when I take the supers off. And so the frames, I guess in the super, you either have mediums or you have deeps, and they both fit in the storage bin that I shared, I guess, that picture of, and we can share a link to this maybe in our in our notes. And so those storage bins can take either deeps or mediums. And what I would do is I'm using those lids as my trays. I'm using those bins as I'm bringing the bees, the full frames out of the hive into the kitchen. And so after I'm done with my extraction, I would just put those pulled frames back in those bins and seal them up. And they're okay, until I need them. It's really good to kind of put them on right after extraction, because the bees can use that honey that's dripping off of them, and they can also really quickly fill them back up. It takes a lot faster for them to fill those wet frames that already have the cells of wax drawn out than for them to start with a blank foundation and have to first do all that work of building the comb before they can fill it up and start using it again. So it's a nice kind of fast lane for getting your supers refilled.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And related to that, how do you store supers so that pests don't get into them? And I think this is a little bit going into like storing things for winter, but we can maybe touch on this a little bit.
Sure. So those storage bins are great for the frames, but your Primal Bee big frames or other things like that you want to kind of hold on to for the following season, they wouldn't be able to fit. So what I do for protecting against wax moths is I use a double bag system. So I get like the thickest ply bag that I can get from the hardware store, black, preferably with drawstrings that I could kind of seal shut. And I put them in, I seal the drawstring, I wrap it around and tie it, so there's no chance of anything getting out of that particular bag. And then I turn it upside down and put it into another open bag like that. Same thing with the drawstring, tying it off. And this is best for wax moths. Wax moths can chew through plastic, and so it's very unlikely that they'll get through two bags kind of set up like this. I've never seen it happen, but I have seen kind of the flimsier trash bags get eaten through with just one layer. So yeah, keeping them away from mice and ants. Try to store them in a place where you don't have a mice and ant problem. And if you do have a mice and ant problem, then I would recommend, using mice and trap captures and repellents. The ant bait that I use is like taro, the liquid baits, and I'll use that in areas like sheds and things like that where I'm storing my equipment. Just try to keep the ant population down. For mice, I use the either sticky traps or cats or whatever I have on hand to keep the mice out. Mesh, chicken wire, things like that can help for sheds that might have holes in them or something like that to kind of tighten things up a bit. But yeah, keeping everything, I think, bagged helps to keep the smell from attracting these things, from attracting wax moths, mice, and ants. So the double bag system works for just about all the bee equipment that I've had to store.
Yeah. And you use unscented bags, I'm guessing, right? Like not the scented kind.
Yeah, it's more like the landscaping bags, so the real thick contractor, thickest ply you can find bags. Yeah.
Yep.
Helps if they stretch, some of them can stretch to shape. And I don't try to leave them for forever, right? I want to get back to them. So if I have a wax moth problem, then I'll do this to, stop the problem and quarantine that equipment. But those wax moths are still going to be breeding in there, and so it's important to kind of get in and stop the problem by removing the wax moths and cleaning the equipment.
Yep.
Yeah, the storage bins, same thing. So I kind of peek into the plastic covers, to look at my frames that, may have honey on them or were processed, and like wet frames. And I'm just looking for webbing or things like that might indicate there's pests on that equipment. And it's better because you have each set of frames in, one storage bin. So if something goes in wrong in one of them, it doesn't go through your whole shed and attack everything. It's more quarantined. So.
Yep. This is another question from Anne. She said she put extracted frames back in her hive, but it caused major robbing for her during a dearth. So she asked what else you recommended instead, if you had any other recommendations.
Yeah, so during a dearth, this could cause problems, especially if you have the hive open for a really long time. You want to make this really quick. You've already had this, and depending on how quickly after extraction, right, we pulled the frames, may have gone in and had the hives open for, an hour or so, pulling all these frames and getting them into our storage bin. And then 2 or 3 days later, going back and putting these wet frames back in could help promote kind of this robbing, because the hive is open, activity there. So if I recommend kind of giving yourself a break between, the pulling the frames and the extraction, and then another break between the extraction and putting those wet frames back on, trying to time it when there's not a dearth and make sure it's a very quick kind of job, right? We're just going to go in, and you may already have the wet frames in a super that you're just putting the super, back on the hive and closing up instead of having to do individual frames while you're out there. Whatever you can cut time, during your hive open for the inspection will definitely help reduce robbing. You could also freeze those frames. So, you could take those wet frames and freeze them and then give them back at another time if you wanted to. The freezing also would kill any wax moths that are on the frames or small hive beetle eggs. So freezing for 48 to 36 hours is really good for pest control too. Yeah, there's also robbing screens that you can put on front of the hive. Be Smart makes one. And basically it's helpful for robbing, but also for wasps and hornets that might be coming to invade the hive, and it's basically a screen that goes on the front of the hive, and the bees go in and out through the top, but the smell draws anything else kind of towards the face of that screen, and they can't figure out they have to go up and over to get in. So that's another option. Using entrance reducers is really helpful too. So you all should have these hard plastic entrance reducers that came with your hive. I usually have one closed and one reduced when I'm first starting the hive up. As it gets warm, I'm getting more traffic from foragers. I'll make them both open like this with the reducers in but open. And then, maybe if you're seeing significant robbing, you can always close one and then leave the other open. So just kind of giving your hive more defense.
Yep. And let us know if that answered your question too. This is another question that I think is relevant more to Primal Bee, but why do we recommend gluing supers before they fill with honey, and what happens if you don't do that?
Yeah, I found this out firsthand with one of the first Primal Bee hives I was working with. I did not glue because it seemed like they snugged together. They work just like Legos. You have 3 pegs and 3 holes on each side and end cap for the deep super and 2 for the medium, and you just push them together, and it seemed like it was holding great. And then I put it on the hive, and I put the frames in it, and I worked with it all season. And then when I went to take it off, because it was full of honey, the weight of the honey pulled downwards, and the way the handles are shaped made flip upwards, and I have 8 honey frames on the ground that I got to pick up, and that's no fun. So I would recommend using Gorilla Glue or Tight Bond. It's their Carpenter wood glue that's water-based. I put a drop in each of those cavities that the pegs fit into. I fit it together, and then I wait about 24 hours till it dries. And when it dries, you should be able to kind of grab the super and pull on it, and it won't come apart. If you really need to get them apart after you've glued them, I have used like a spray bottle with soapy water and squirted into the seam, and then kind of used a hive tool and wriggled them apart. It took some effort, but it is possible after you glue them.
Cool. Yeah. That's a great firsthand experience.
Yeah, it's an easy way to learn a lesson.
Yeah. Can you talk more about cottage food laws? And I think for this also, if we don't know necessarily, I know that they probably differ state by state, but we can maybe talk more broadly about what you know about them as well. If you have that knowledge, and if not, we can always share that information afterward in the recap as well.
Sure. So we had cottage food laws in Florida, and so I became familiar with these kind of working there. And it basically allows you to sell homemade honey without having a commercial kitchen. And because it's low risk, it's raw, even as raw, it's low risk. It's shelf stable. So it's almost every state has some type of a cottage food law set up, but not all states. So double check, your own particular state and situation. These laws, depending on state to state, may change for the amount of honey that you can sell, and or the regulations or inspections that need to happen for your cottage food law. It really only covers pure honey in most cases. It wouldn't cover something like a honey that's been infused with something, for instance. Yeah, so usually it's around $10,000, kind of a cap on how much you can sell. It goes up to $250,000 in Florida, so it depends on which state you're in, how much you can legally sell through this program. But most of them require you to have a basic food safety course, so you have to apply for this, this permit still. And you have more exact labeling rules where you're putting exactly your physical home address where the honey was processed, or you can't put PO box. Or if you're using a farm or something like that to process your honey at, you'd have to have the physical location where the honey was processed so they could track back if they ever need to. So,
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, but you almost need a whole separate degree, in the process for learning about cottage food laws. But I'm happy to work through if anyone has questions about their particular state's cottage food laws and things like that. Happy to kind of work through the channels and make sure you get the information you need.
Yeah. Awesome. In terms of wax cappings, what do you do afterwards with those? And those, I know sometimes folks also sell that in terms of like wax products, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about what the options are there.
Yeah, so wax cap, I guess for wax is actually super valuable compared to the honey, by weight for the bees. Energetically, it's very valuable for them to make this wax. And so if you can preserve, save some of this wax, and I've seen too many honey extractions where afterwards the wax is left in some bucket and just, goes off until someone decides to clean the garage and throw it away. But it's really good to kind of take that wax. You can use solar melters to kind of melt that wax down. There's several online. I've tried to make some DIY ones. It also really depends on your climate. If you're somewhere where it's not super cold, not super sunny all the time, and gets cold, then you're going to have trouble using a solar wax melter. Some other options are go to like a craft store, and they usually have a candle making supplies, and I would get these wax pitchers. So that's like basically a metal pitcher that you would put your wax into. And then I put this metal pitcher into a deep pot, and I boil water in the pot. And then this is going to kind of melt my wax. Wax is flammable. Beeswax is flammable. So be safe, with it. If you get it up to a certain temperature, it will ignite. So you want to make sure that you're watching those temps on your wax. I'll melt it down into blocks, and then I'll use it for various things. You can also melt it into kind of crayons. So kind of using a paper towel roll or something like that, you add the wax into as the form. And then these are pretty handy for if you need to go while you're doing an inspection, you see that one of your foundation, you need to apply some wax to it. You could just rub it on with the blocks. You can melt them back down on and melt them back, and then use a roller to kind of paint them on your frames. It's great for helping with wounds. If you get a cut or something like that, a little beeswax on it is almost like a natural Band-Aid. The beeswax can be used for lip balms and candles and furniture polish and all different things. So I would try to save as much of it as you can.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Usually after my wax cappings, I put them into something that I could kind of either mash down and get all the honey out of. And then I take what's left over and I put that into my double boiler system just to melt it down into, and then I can pour those into silicone molds. They make silicone molds for cookies or for candy or for ice, so you could just use any of those same silicone molds and pour your wax into, and they use same silicone molds for soap, so you can find a variety of shapes and patterns and designs, from just a cube to ornate sculptures, really. So
that's cool.
Yeah, have fun with it.
Yeah.
I also wanted to, I guess that book that I shared on one of the slides, The Honey Connoisseur, I wanted to recommend that again. It's a really good book for understanding honey and the value of honey based on its local flavor and its local story, how honey's marketed and how honey is compared. Some honey is medicinal. Some honey has really unique local flavor, like Tupelo, is a very southeastern U.S. flavor honey. So kind of that book is great for that. And the author Marina Marquez, she also has a sensory course that you could take online and learn about this and become a certified honey taster that would get
Oh, cool.
invited to honey expos and things like that, and honey contests that are held around the world all the time. So it's a great way to get some free travel in, be tasting honey for the fun of it, and it's a neat path. A friend of mine has gone through several levels of their coursework on that and are working to become a honey judge. So
Oh, wow. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's a neat pathway. I may do that someday.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that actually like is a good segue to one thing I wanted to chat about was how a lot of our customers recently have been having a lot of great first year harvests with the Primal Bee hive. And we can maybe
Mhm.
discuss how a thermally efficient hive differs from a Langstroth in how it produces a better harvest, or maybe even just what we're seeing empirically with our customers right now. And also one of our customers that we recently spoke to, whose name is also Jason, he did a DNA kind of test on his own honey, which was a really interesting thing that you can pay different labs, I guess, to do. So that's just a unique
Neat.
thing. But yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, so there is several different tests you can find online. I know of the one that does the spectrometry and gives you your fingerprint of the DNA, I guess, of fingerprint of the hive, which I think includes the DNA, the flavor composition, the number of pollen grains of different types of flowers, and so on. So it's really fascinating info to get. And it varies, the cost for this, to send your samples in. I would also recommend kind of sending a sample into any of these honey contests that are out there, for folks to, find out what people think of their honey. Some of them are called black jar contests, where they spray paint the outside of your jar so that you can't see the honey. You can only taste it and kind of judge it based on that flavor. And so, winners of these different contests can then say, my honey placed, first in the, international honey judging competition or something like that, which would help be a marketing, tool for them to use to be able to then sell their honey. I'm not sure if I got directly to your question. I think I went around it. Could you repeat?
No, yeah, I was just wanting to speak on kind of what
The
changes
thermo.
about honey harvests and what we're seeing in
Oh,
people's first years. Yeah.
yes. So I was really surprised. I've been keeping bees for about 20 years, and pretty much the rule of thumb is if you're getting a hive started, in this year, don't harvest any honey. Don't expect to harvest any honey until the following year. First, you have to wait till they overwinter. And my colony here in California, I set it up in December. They went the whole year, and I ended up getting 4 supers worth of honey. So I had to decide, how much to leave on. I left 1 super on, and then those other 3 supers I put into storage just in case I'd have to feed it back to them, because I've never gotten honey from a first year hive before. So but we've seen, on average, some of most of the folks that I'm talking to are getting, 1 or 2 supers of honey, sometimes 3 or 4 supers of honey. Dan Reppin, he had
Yeah.
great success with his 30 hives. So, or
Yeah, we just shared
50
his story
hives.
on the
hmm
blog. Yeah.
Yeah, 50
Pretty awesome.
hives. So he got about, I think it was 2 supers worth of honey for just about, for on average from his hives, which is great for a first year, just getting started. Yeah, I would caution, you do want to make sure you leave some behind. Otherwise, you may have to feed in the spring. So one of the tests that I heard about in Iowa that they recommend is lifting their hive. And if it's 130 pounds, it's basically that's kind of the benchmark, 130 pounds for the weight of your hive. That's how much you don't need to add honey, or you won't need to feed. But if it's less than 130 pounds, then be ready to add honey later on, or be ready to feed. So I think with the Primal Beehive, though, I saw them using only 2 frames out of that medium that I provided them, and they don't need to, heat up the hive or keep the hive warm through clustering and vibrating. So it's really helping with their energy. I noticed this past summer we had several heat waves where it was up above 100 degrees, and my bees weren't clustering or bearding at the front to ventilate. They weren't needing to go out as much for water, and so all of this is saving the honey just build up so fast. With those very long frames, the population is continuous and large, and that's really you have more foragers bringing in more food, but using less of it to heat or cool their hive. It's great.
Yeah, it's really impressive. Dan's story was really great.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I think for our last question here, going along with what you were just saying, does the amount of honey you leave on for winter differ for a primal beehive?
So to be on the safe side, I would try to use the Langstroth recommendations, but watch your first year. You may see that it was too much. I would probably, at the most, I would cut those recommendations in half. So we have that map. I don't know if we could bring that slide up again for just a moment.
Yeah. Get that going.
But basically, if it's saying, we want to leave 2 deeps worth of honey, then 1 deep worth of honey is probably going to be fine. If you have some kind of mechanism to tell the weight of your honey, so you can use different types of scales. Some scales have a Bluetooth, that they'll send you data, letting you know your hive weighs this, this hour. And you can kind of track it over time to watch your honey build up. Then that's a great tool. And it's also helpful for in the wintertime kind of watching, okay, it's decreasing to this weight. So now I know they don't have enough honey and I have to add some on and get out there in an emergency, pop some honey on. So, this northern altitude, we're talking about 2 deep boxes or 3 mediums. I feel like 1 deep box or 2 mediums may be fine. But again, especially if I would keep track of it, use this as your benchmark and keep track and go out and, as you can, just check and see if that weight's significantly decreasing, midwinter. And then same thing, we're looking at central Midwest, probably 1 deep is fine. For the upper South, 1 medium or 2 medium. Yeah, I'd say 1 medium is probably fine. I'm in California, 1 medium was fine for me. So if you're in Alaska, you have a different story. So in Alaska, they get, bitter freezing temperatures and for a very long winter. So most of them need to either feed or bring out additional supers of honey or have some kind of, I've heard of some bringing Langstroth hives from outside into the home, near the heater to just keep them warm, is one of the practices in Alaska. So, you're going to have, I guess, those extreme situations. Some things you could do is condense that hive down a little bit so there's less mouths to feed. So one way that you could do this, if you all are needing any supers or any individual parts, like I was going to say the follower board, you could order a couple extra follower boards and put them in places in your hive where they haven't drawn out all the comb. So say you have 5 or 6 frames that are drawn out and going into winter, you could get a couple follower boards and then add these in as your extra 2 or 3 frames on the outside. This will add a little extra insulation and less that the bees have to keep warm. We don't have all this stuff available really on the website, but if you reach out to me or to one of the Primal Bee team, and let us know that you want to purchase extra follower boards or extra frames or extra supers, then we'll be happy to send you a payment link, and we can take care of all that, through email. So
awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think this was a great live. We are right at that time. So I will let me move this from the screen and move that from the screen, and we will wrap it up. But thanks so much, Jason. As always, we will have our next live during the third Wednesday of next month. If you will have a specific topic you want us to cover, please drop it in the comments. And we'll post the replay tomorrow along with some clips throughout the week. But thanks to everyone who joined. And thanks again, Jason. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for facilitating. Thanks for everybody who joined, and I hope you all have a great day. All the best.